Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and today we have some stuff to look at again, specifically one of these. So a package finally came today that came out of Australia, and sadly there's a couple problems with that package. Basically the value was supposed to be 100 Australian dollars, but there was a typo and it was put down as 1100 Australian dollars. So I just had to pay about 150 euros in import fees, and yeah, I have like 10 euros left for food of the month, though there's only 1 week left, and I'll hopefully get a refund from the import bureau. Anyway, apart from that, yeah, still some really cool hardware here. So this thing right here is again for FZ.ix. I don't get to keep this. I get to keep these two though. But we've already taken a look at the ePower 5 before, so this is really not that special. Special thing is this, because this is the GALAX, well, they call it the graphics card power board. And you can already see it right here. They advertise 960 amps of current output. Now that 960 amps is fairly unrealistic. Now they have some specs here, so it's based on an IR3595A. 2 GHz switching frequency? What? Shouldn't that be 2 MHz? I think that's a typo. I think it's supposed to be 2 MHz switching frequency, because 2 GHz switching frequency is like short to ground. Anyway, so it's using IR3555 amps. So yeah, these are 60 amp power stages, and because they have 16 of them, that's how they get to their 960 amps. But yeah, just because it's a 60 amp power stage doesn't mean you can actually continuously drive 60 amps through. Well, actually it does mean you can continuously drive 60 amps through them, as long as you can keep it cool, which you can't. So yeah. And they even say they're using Panasonic SP caps, 470 microfarad capacitors. They don't say how many they have, but yeah, it's a pretty decent capacitors. GPU voltage can be set by hardware adjustable to 1.9 to 1.6 volts. That's actually kind of a problem, because if you put this on, say, like a 980 Ti, if you have these on liquid nitrogen, you actually want more than 1.6. Like 1.6 volts is like fine for like 10 series for e-powering. For anything older, you'll probably want to go to like 1.8, maybe even 1.9 volts under liquid nitrogen. So you actually have to voltmod this to get that extra voltage. 1.6, like, it's fine for Pascal. I don't know about Fermi. Fermi doesn't really run that high of a voltage. It might be fine too. But yeah. Then 3 8 pins. Yeah, for 50 watts. Is that just the spec? Like an 8 pin's rated for what? 150? Yeah, that's just 3 times 150. Okay, so that's the spec. So it can at least do twice that. Because the spec is very conservative on the 8 and 6 pins. Voltage monitoring points are available for accurate real time. Well, okay, yeah. Yep. Anything else? Just says GALAX OC Lab. Okay, let's open it up then. Comes in this very nice foam material, and here we have it. So I don't know entirely, but I think there was a version of this that came with a fan. This one doesn't. But yeah, so this is the e-power, and yeah, so the architecture of this e-power is a bit different from the EVGA e-power 5. As you can see, there's 2 rows of VRM. Let's actually just take the heatsink off so you can see better. Because, I mean, yeah, it's 16 IR3555s, and this power board isn't actually that wide. Like, the Power 5 is a lot wider, if I remember correctly. So yeah, they just do 2 rows with 8 phases. There we go. And here we have it. So yeah, and controller already said this should be the 35. I can't really see it. And these are the IR3555s. So, yeah, the IR3555 is like a more modern, like a slightly upgraded version of the IR3550. Both are 60 amp power stages. So, really, really, really nice high-end like power components from International Rectifier for the time. Of course, these days you get like 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 amp power stages. But honestly, they're not all that different from 60 amp power stages. The only difference is just like, yeah, for a couple milliseconds, it can technically do 120 amps. But like for the same reason as you can't run 60 amps through each of these at the same time, like for a long time, it's the same for the other like higher current power stages that you get these days, because they just run way too hot if you run that amount of current through them. So in actual like and practical environment, these power stages are about actually just the same as whatever power stages you get these days, even though the datasheet might indicate something very different. Yeah, it does have fan headers for the version with the fan, so I'm not gaslighting myself here. Yeah, and one thing that's kind of cool compared to the EVGA ePower5, I guess I can just unbox one of them too, to show the difference. Oops, so this is one of the ePower5s, is pre-tint already a bit. But yeah, you can see how the ePower5 only has like outputs here. But the GALAX ePower also has, like, it has ground all the way around here. And then if we look at the back, it also has ground everywhere on the back, whereas the ePower5 also only has it here. So the Hall of Fame ePower should be a lot easier to get some good ground hookup points. Like the VCore output is about the same size, but all you get for grounding on the front of the ePower5 is this, and then these two little tabs on the side. That's it. This is VCore, this is memory. Now the Half ePower doesn't have a memory, it's a single output voltage, it's just VCore. That's something that the ePower5 does better, because it has 2 phases for memory and then 12 for VCore. This is 12 volt, don't want to connect anything to that. And then yeah, no, ePower5 you get this for ground. These 4 are VCore again, this is memory again, and then there's one more ground here. So the ePower5, like, don't get me wrong, ePower5 is still very good. But this one should be a lot more straightforward to get good ground connections. Because, like, the thing that I've read and also kind of confirmed in making a couple ePowers myself is you want to have a lot more ground connections than you have VCore connections. That's just a thing. I don't really have a specific explanation for it. But you want to have more ground than VCore. Like basically Tin says it in the ePower5 guide. And I also kind of, because when I build ePowers, I kind of have an equal amount of ground and VCore, and some of those didn't really work that well compared to other ePowers that use a similar amount of connections but have a less even split between ground and VCore. So yeah, so this one makes it really easy to just have a lot of ground. So that's the cool thing that this thing does. And of course the VCore on this is technically more powerful than on the ePower5. You can actually max out an ePower5. So coming back to those 1.9 volts or whatever, I think. Yeah, so like Buildzoid put an ePower5 on a Titan X that he had. And when he had it on liquid nitrogen, I think he actually ran like 1.9 volts or maybe even 2 volts on that. And it actually maxed out the VCore VRM on the ePower5, because this is also an IR3555s, but only 12 phases instead of 16. And this thing was actually maxed by a Titan X. So there is actually an argument to be made for this 16 phase here, because this will have, well, it has 4 extra phases. So it has more headroom for like a Titan X. So yeah. So it isn't just ridiculous overkill. I mean, it kinda is ridiculous overkill, but since you can actually max out an ePower5 under some circumstances, this VRM does have a reason to exist. So now let's get little bit more into the VRM itself. Specifically, let's look a bit at the capacitors. And in typical Hall of Fame fashion, we can see that GALAX just loves their 12,000 microfarad aluminum. No, actually, that's 16 volts. So these are 12,000 microfarad aluminum polymers, followed by a lot of multi-layer ceramic capacitors. And then on the back, we have even more multi-layer ceramics and their before mentioned 470 microfarad Panasonic SP caps. So in terms of output filter, yeah, I mean, okay, they one thing that I would have liked to see is instead of multi-layer ceramics, more of the SP caps, because you already have a lot of multi-layer ceramics on the front, but I can see why they didn't do that because they have the capacitor legs come through here. And they can't really put them farther back because then there's the inductor. It's still a really good output filter though, like compared to the ePower5 again, it's a bit better. So the ePower5 is using 821 microfarad can types, and then it's probably a similar amount of SP caps at the ePower5. Let's just count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 16, so it's 1 per phase. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15. So this one has slightly more SP cap per phase, but still less total SP cap than the Hall of Fame. And then for multi-layer ceramics, well, we have a couple scattered in between, and then actually there's quite a lot on the back. So for multi-layer ceramics, it's probably... No, I think the Hall of Fame has a little bit more multi-layer ceramics than the ePower5, but it's not that big of a difference. But yeah, so like there's more total capacitance in the GALAX Hall of Fame ePower. Not just, they have more of everything. They have higher capacitance in can types, they have more multi-layer ceramics, they have more SP caps. There's just more of everything on the Hall of Fame ePower. And that's kind of a trend. Like if you ever look at a Hall of Fame graphics card, at least some of the newer ones, like my 580 Hall of Fame is a bit meh. But if you look at like the Hall of Fame 2080 Ti or 3090 or whatever, there's just these huge giant output filters with like several rows of multi-layer ceramics and always these 1200 microfarad can types, and then also loads of SP caps. Like they just use all the different kinds of capacitors and just an extreme amount of all of them. That's just kind of the thing that GALAX does in the Hall of Fame, and it seems to do rather well. Like now, there was a time for the 3090 where the Hall of Fame was firmly in the lead, and the Kingpin was actually like quite at a disadvantage. But then later the Kingpin pulled ahead again, so that maybe there was like a revision change, or maybe just more skilled overclockers got their hands on them. But yeah. So I'm a big fan of GALAX's ridiculous output filters because I just like looking at really good output filters. It's probably my favorite part of VRMs actually, because it's not that hard to like make a VRM that can handle a lot of current. You just like take IR3555s and have like more than 10 phases of it. That's pretty much fine for pretty much everything, except for like Titan X's. But like good output filters, there's a few more challenges. You need good space, you need to select good capacitors, you need to have a good mix of them, you need to place them in a good way where they're close to what they're powering. Now, of course, on an ePower it's not that hard because, well, there's not that much you can do because the ePower is not part of the card, it gets connected to the card. But when you do an output filter directly on a GPU, you need to position them in a way where they're closest to the thing they're powering. So I think it's a lot harder to make a good output filter than just having like a high current capable VRM. So that's probably why I appreciate good output filters a bit more than just strong VRMs in general. Yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much it, I would say. Oh, that's the voltage read points that we're talking about. So there's 3 different 12-volt power planes. It has a 3.3 volt rail. It has a driver VCC probably, because the power stages likely run on like 5 or 7 volts or something. And then the controller might need the 3.3 volt rail. Because there's these 2 little converters. One of them's probably the driver VCC, the other one's probably the 3.3 volt rail. And then of course the output, and then the last one's probably ground. And you do adjust the voltage by literally just changing the vid. So you have this little array here. Well, yeah, you literally just adjust the vid of the controller. Because on the e-power5, you have this entire interface up here, where you just, yeah, this is kind of like an integrated EV board. You can also use an actual EV board here, but those are kind of rare. So they have an integrated EV board thing here on the e-power5, which is how you set your voltage. And the Hall of Fame e-power, well, it gets away without doing that because they just let you edit the vid, which is a bit harder to, like, it's less straightforward, but it's still a pretty good way of directly getting access to voltage control, which is actually something that they've done for quite a while. Let me get my 580 Hall of Fame and show it to you a little bit. So this is the 580 Hall of Fame, and you can see here, oh, there's this connector there. That's the same thing. So I don't have it with this card, but GALAX, when you got the card new, they gave you like a little panel that you could connect to that, and it would effectively be the exact same thing as this. You could just directly adjust the vid of your controller. So directly get voltage control that way. Which, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just direct voltage control. You just adjust the vid. Like, if you don't really know what I'm talking about, like, vid is like, it's like a code. Like, you can either set a, so there's like several vid pins. I think there's usually 8. It starts at vid 0 and goes to vid 7. Yeah, so there's 8 vid pins, and each pin corresponds to like a certain increase or decrease in voltage. So I think when I was looking at the NCP 5395, which I was trying to vid mod, but that didn't really work out because 2 of the vid pins are hard locked to a state, so that it restricts what you can do. But I think how it worked on that controller, and it's different from controller to controller, but the principle is usually the same. I think that controller was, when all the vids are set to 0 or either 1, it's at 1.6125 volts or something. And each pin that you set to 0 decreases that voltage by a set amount. So vid 0 would be like 6.25 millivolts, then vid 1 would be 12 millivolts, then the other one would be like 25, then one would be 50, 100, 200, 400, and 800 millivolts. So each pin is like an increasing amount of voltage level difference that you can make, and by selecting like a different combination of them, you can select pretty much any voltage level by just combining them in different ways. So that's a very basic description of how the vid works. And I just give you direct control of this, which, yeah, I mean, you need to wrap your head around it first, but it still is a very low-level direct access control to voltage control. Yeah, you just don't really see it anymore these days because, like, at least graphics cards and also motherboards these days, they mess around a lot with the controller. Which is like, yeah, so on video cards at least, you just want to like disconnect the ref, was it the ref 80J pin? Like there's a pin that you want to disconnect in a video card so the card driver can't change your voltage level again. But yeah, anyway, so let's put the heatsink back on. It's actually a really nice looking heatsink, especially with this like Hall of Fame logo on it. Really nice looking heatsink. And also very convenient for, like, again, having a fan on it. Yeah, this is a lot better looking heatsink than the ePower5. Because the ePower5 heatsink is rather small, and I'm not saying it's bad, but on my 780 that I e-powered, I guess I can show that just as an example for what an e-power looks like for people who see this content for the first time, who haven't watched my ePower5 video before. But on the 780 that I e-powered with the ePower5, the heatsink actually got quite hot. So I'm like, well, they could have done something like, there's a lot of space where they could have just extended the heatsink, you know, like this. Like, first off, the VRM here is split in two. Like, so one half of the VRM is very far away from the other half, so that you have like 2 points of heat, whereas you only have 1 point of heat here. So it's a lot more compact, and then the heatsink's smaller. And yeah, like the fins are a little bit bigger, but yeah. And I guess let's get my 780. So, this here is my GTX 780 that I e-powered, and this is where my first e-power 5 went. So I used to have only this, now I'm gonna have the other two, and FCI gets the Hall of Fame e-power. But yeah, so this is my latest and best working e-power, though it's not really that great of an e-power. It could be a lot better, and I still consider it to be rather unfinished. But yeah, so basically you have some graphics cards like this reference GTX 780 here. The core on this is really good. It clocks really, really high, but it's on the reference PCB, so it's on a 6-phase with 50 amp DR MOSes. And a 780, well, it's not a GM200, but GK110 still gets some pretty serious power consumption once you push it, and the reference VRM is just not gonna take it. So what you do is you attach an e-power, because this is twice the phases and more power per phase, because this is 60 amp smart power stages, the other one was 50 amp DR MOSes. Basically you increase the amount of power that you can deliver to the card, like more than twofold with this. And of course you get direct voltage control on everything, that's also a plus, you don't need to do any extra volt mods. And it also adds like this a lot of extra filtering here, though sadly to the connections, this giant output filter here doesn't really do that much compared to what's on the card. But you can see I still have an output filter here on the card. And yeah, so this is what an e-power looks like. If you're interested in seeing like how to make it and how the process looks like, Der Bauer has a really, really good video on him e-powering a GTX 1060 with the Asus e-power. Sadly, that's one that never went retail. Also, I think the Hall of Fame e-power might have never gone retail, I'm not entirely sure. The EVGA e-power was retail, that's why there's so many of them, and they're also relatively cheap to get. The Hall of Fame e-power, I actually don't know if that was ever retail. But the Asus e-power that Der Bauer had was never retail, so he got it from Asus directly, probably because he's an overclocker that works with them. But anyway, he shows how to make an e-power like that, and then he has a second video where he overclocks the card with the e-power. But yeah, so this is my e-power. It's not really that great. My next attempt would actually be something more advanced, involving these copper plates right here. So there's another video by Shaggy SVK, how he uses an e-power 5 on, I think, a 9800 GT. And instead of using like wires, he just cut up a piece of this copper plate and just attach the copper plate to the output and then to the card, which is a much, much better connection than all these wires here. And that's the next thing I want to try. Because, yeah, just a much, much better connection. And also I would like to drum away some of the solar mask on the card. As you can see here, I didn't do it. I just used the solar pads for the then inductors to hook up to. And yeah, as I said before, there's not that much ground. There's only one ground wire on the front here. This one, everything else is VCore. And then on the back, these two are actually memory, so that goes to the memory VRM, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ground. So a total of 8 ground, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 VCore. So I have exact the amount of VCore and ground, which, as I've read, is not what you should do. So this should probably have a lot more ground. It's just sadly, there's not that much ground to go around on the card. So yeah. I might have to redo everything and then scrape the solder mask off and then find a ground plane that way. But yeah, so this is what an e-power looks like. This one works rather like okayish. I had the card Sub-Zero once, as you can see by the installation that it has. It works okay. But it could be a lot better. So yeah, going back to the Hall of Fame e-power. So I think this is a pretty cool e-power. The only thing that I don't really like about it is, of course, that, well, you have to adjust it with the vid, which you don't get a voltage readout thing like on the e-power 5. and it's just a bit more annoying to set your voltage. Other than that, oh yeah, and it only goes to 1.6 volts, because that's where most of the vids end. You're gonna have to like probably mod the feedback circuit on this to like get more voltage range out of that. But other than that, I really like the E-Powers. Like it's lower profile than the E-Power 5. Like it's a slight bit longer, but it's a lot more narrow than the E-Power 5, which probably makes it easier to attach to cards, because one problem you have is like the memory output is right here. Most cards end like here. So your memory is gonna like just be a very long wire going somewhere, which is bad. You want to have your wires be as short as possible. Or just use a copper plate like this. But yeah, so I mean, of course, this is only single output, so yeah, this is technically worse than that, because it straight up doesn't have it. But yeah, the one VRM that it has, it does really well. So 16 phase IR3555s, like that should be enough power for, well, actually a 3090 Ti might actually max this, but a 30, like, that's one thing that I hope becomes a thing one day. So you know how like 2080 Ti's, 3080s, 3090s, 3090 Ti's, they have VRMs on both sides of the core. Like before, you used to just have a VRM like mostly on the right side of the core and then sometimes on the left side on some lower power cards. Which you still have on like RTX 3060s, but on the high-end cards you usually now have two VRM, like, well, it's actually one VRM, but you have like one row of phases on the right side of the core, one row of phases on the left side, which is for just feeding voltage better to the core, because then you have the voltage level coming in from both sides of the core, not just one side, so the left side of the core doesn't get a lower level than the right side. Which of course makes e-powering a bit difficult, because then you would just have voltage coming in from one side, which makes voltage regulation for the core just kind of worse. But you can also just attach two e-powers, because then both the controllers would be balancing each other out against each other, which could cause all kinds of problems. So what I hope one day someone will come up with is a solution for having two e-powers, which probably involves having like a master board and then a slave board, and then some sort of connection between the master board and slave board. Like, I don't think a USB cable can carry it, but like, basically, instead of having traces in a PCB, have like a connector on the board that goes to like a wire, that then goes to the slave board for the controller to control those phases on the slave board. Now, of course, it's gonna be a few problems, because probably latency is gonna become a problem when the cable gets too long. Maybe resistance of the wires is gonna be a problem. Like, I'm not an electrical engineer. I just think it should be possible. It might just not be all that great. So what I hope someone will come up with, especially for 3090s, because in a couple of years, like, those are gonna have dying VRMs left and right. Those need e-powers. Yeah, I hope someone will come up with this. Elmer is maybe working on an e-power, but I think it's only gonna be one thing again. And even, like, he says it's a thing, but he's not really prioritizing it right now. But yeah, he's on I think a 16-phase Ampo board. Like, he sells a one-phase little e-power that's for like smaller rails. But he teases sometimes that he's working on like a 16-phase version, which looks about like this. So it would be really cool if we get a new Hall of Fame power board, because these are no longer being made. Also, these are no longer being made, but there's a lot of these just floating around, so you can still relatively easily get them. These have not been made for quite a while, and they've always been kind of rare to get. So Hall of Fame e-powers are pretty hard to come by. So it's kind of cool that someone's working on a sort of replacement for these. And yeah, I just, like, I don't know, if someone watches this video and just thinks that the idea would be crazy enough to pursue, I would love to see an e-power concept where you have a master board and then a slave board, so you can actually properly e-power those cards that have like 2 rows of VRM on each side. Or maybe this would even work for like dual GPU cards like GTX 590s, where they only need one controller per core. Though one controller for the entire dual GPU card. Though it might be a problem, because like when one core has a transient and the other one doesn't, yeah. But anyway, like, if someone can come up with a concept for like 2 rows of VRM on the left side and on the right side of the core. If someone can come up with an e-power that works with that, that would be really cool. I would love to see that. But yeah, enough of that. So there's a really cool e-power. Like, I mean, I love the white PCB. I wish my 580 Hall of Fame would have a white PCB. And I was actually gonna have a dead 980 Ti Hall of Fame, but then it turns out that the guy that sold me the card was a scammer, and I never got the card. Which, really weird. Like, someone sells a dead 980 Ti Hall of Fame, an old card that's dead, and then they decide to scam me. So, yeah, that, I don't know. Maybe that person like died or something, couldn't send it back out, I don't know. I just think it's a really weird thing to scam people with. Anyway, yeah, really cool power board. I should get back to the power board and not go on side tangents anymore. Really cool power board, like better output filter, better like, yeah, so like if the ePower 5 was only a V-Core VRM and like without this part or the memory part, this one would straight up be better. This one's a better solution if you just need a very good single VRM. This one's a better solution if you need more than one VRM and if you want something that's a little easier to work with. So both have their use cases. I kind of prefer the ePower 5 because there's not many cases where this V-Core VRM is not good enough, but there's certainly use cases for this board too, like tight Nexus 980 Ti's, and possibly like you could still ePower 3090 with this. It's just that you're gonna have voltage only coming in from, or more like current coming in from one side, and yeah, gonna become a problem for the core. You're gonna need like a higher average voltage for the same clock. Anyway, I think video is long enough now. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this look at more ePower boards and a more rare ePower board. Like, I mean, Buildzoid also has a video on this. He also has one of these. But yeah, it's compared to the ePower 5, it's an ePower that's rather hard to come by. It looks unique because, of course, the white PCB. And it's a really good VRM. Really nice output filter, really nice current handling capability. Though it has some kinks to work out. So, yeah, hope you all enjoyed this view, and until next time, goodbye.